Hello, and welcome to another Northstar Talks Politics. Today, I wish to discuss an issue that's exceedingly common in the United States. I mean, enormously common. It's an abuse of power, and it is a symptom of capitalism and the unequal power relationships in bodies. And one of the many reasons it can be argued correctly that we need a socialist system. And this lies at the nexus of power, labor, income, and government services. This is the misclassification of employees as independent contractors, as the title of this piece from the Department of Labor website. It hasn't yet been removed by Trump people, although I'm sure they'll come for this page eventually, indicates. Now, this is a little quick info sheet about whether someone should be classified as an employee or an independent contractor. Um, and I would note that when you're working for someone else, when they're telling you what to do, when you're using their materials, tools, and equipment, you only earn more money by working additional hours. You have a continuing or indefinite relationship. The employer decides how and when the work will be performed. You're an employee, not an independent contractor. I, I'm not providing legal advice. This is verbatim from the Department of Labor's fact sheet. So you can see employer decides how and when the work be performed under the categories of indicators and employee. Indicators and independent contractor, on the other hand, would that the contractor decides how and when they'll perform the work. I experienced this misclassification myself. In fact, it's currently screwing me out of being of Social Security disability insurance. The Social Security Administration is trying to argue I don't have sufficient work credits, and they are arguing that based on missing work credits from jobs I worked, some of which were exempt, but turns out there's a so-called safe harbor provision that a university was able to use to not contribute to my Social Security. I never heard about this. And as a student employee, it would have been nice to know I was not having any contribution to my Social Security. And it's this is a huge problem already because, grad students, they're working while in school even. Doesn't matter if they're working for the university, they're not getting Social Security disability work credits, and you can get screwed if you get disabled at a young age and you're in grad school and you worked some independently but not enough years, and then you get disabled. In my case, I was more screwed because I went back to grad school after a period working because I wasn't getting anywhere with my first master's, and there's a whole story of that. But that's the employee who didn't break the law. The one who did was a factory that ended up making COVID-19 testing equipment actually, and years later. So they've done important work to make society safer, better. I helped the factory. He had gone bankrupt in the past under a different company name. They were had sat unused the manufacturing facility for like 2 years. The economy was starting to slowly recover from the 2008 crash because the previous company went bankrupt around 2008. Sat unused for a number of years. The year was 2014, so I guess 6 years of the factory just sitting empty. They came back in. The factory wasn't in great shape because it had been sitting empty for like 5, 6 years, and they hired me and one other person to clean the factory out. Um, Now, from what I understand, the other person they were paying under the table was like the nephew of one of the people, but they gave me a paycheck. It had tax withholding. They gave me a W-2. They even falsified, as far as they can tell, Social Security contributions. And then what they probably did is they initially did as if as an employee, then decided, oh, there's this loophole. We can put him as an independent contractor. And I don't know exactly how much was fraud and how much was just abusing this rule, which is, I guess, a sort of fraud. I don't know if that would legally qualify as fraud to misclassify someone as an independent contractor, but that's what they did. And I don't know for sure yet. It could turn out that this was only I'm 2 work credits shy, and it could turn out that I only made enough to make 1 work credit because it rounds down. So if I'm even like $1 short of the 2 credit amount, I would work for a month for this employer. So um, whether in 1 work credit or 2 depends on how much they earn, since you can earn work credits anytime during a year. during a calendar year. The local Social Security office person I dealt with who was claiming otherwise was using a pre-1978 rule. I've spoken to other people since, and the people at the federal SSA office are very clear. Yeah, you can earn any time during calendar year. That's correct. Um, so I'm only 2 work credits shy, but because this employer, if I had made enough for 2 work credits a year, which I don't know for sure yet, what I do know is IRS has no record of my employment because independent contractors often have to file their own forms and the employer doesn't file certain forms on their behalf. I didn't do a tax return that year because I made so little money. So without filing independent contractor forms, without filing a tax return, the IRS sent with no record, or maybe the employer didn't submit some forms to the IRS they were supposed to. I'm really not clear of exactly what went wrong here, but it does appear they were misclassifying me as an independent contractor at least. Sorry if my thoughts are muddled. It's not clear piecing together all the info here. But here's a myth sheet from the Department of Labor. Myth number 1, when boss calls me an independent contractor, not an employee, but it doesn't really matter as long as I get paid. Fact, if you're misclassified, you may be denied benefits and protections to which employees are legally entitled. Misclassification also has negative effects on businesses. Typically, only workers who are employees have access to important benefits and protections under certain federal, state, and local laws. Among others, these benefits and protections may include, and I'm going to note the availability of unemployment insurance, employer payment of half of Social Security, and Medicare taxes. They, as it happens, didn't pay anything to Social Security because they had the nerve to give me a W-2, which is supposed to be a form for employees and not for independent contractors, as I understand it. And they definitely did not submit the proper paperwork for having an employee because, again, I was not an independent contractor. I didn't get Social Security credit for this job I did, even though there's no reason it should have been exempt. Misclassification also hurts law-abiding business owners who don't get to compete on a level playing field. Some employers wrongly classify their workers as independent contractors and thereby lower their costs unlawfully. In addition, federal, state, and local governments lose billions of dollars each year in tax revenue as a result of misclassification. So they cheated the federal government out of some of the taxes they were owed. They cheated me out of a Social Security contribution. It hurt a lot of people, and it's not a victimless crime. They did it to fuck me and the government over to their own benefit, the employer. However, despite all this, you go to the IRS website and their remedies for the misclassification are pathetic. There's a voluntary classification settlement program, which doesn't even change the past, really, just prospectively, that is going forward, can voluntarily, it's voluntary that you can choose to participate in, but it's not really voluntary when no other programs are actually effective. Have an employer reclassify people who are always employers as always employees as employees, but it doesn't fix past wrongs. Some misclassified employees can attach Form 8919. It doesn't say who can, but also the fact that they're putting the burden on the worker to fix the abuse of power of the employer is a problem. And then there's provisions for having to pay back taxes. Of course, they prominently list their relief provisions where the employer can contest whether they have to pay old Social Security taxes they owe, but they don't list much about them paying those back taxes because the IRS has been subverted and is now solely on the side of employers. It doesn't matter how much they fuck their employees. I can't even reach the IRS to talk about this issue because I've called them 10 times. They have a stupid generative AI phone tree that even hears coughs as words. I'm sure some of you have heard my cough before. In fact, sorry, there's one now. If the noise canceling, don't move it or make it sound like a sneeze. If you even don't have the thing hear any background noise as a sense to try and screw you up, it'll still give you impossible phone trees full of dead ends, or it'll tell you it's going to give you to a human being, and then it'll just go back to the main menu without saying anything. It said, hold on while we put you in contact with a representative. It said this at one point, and then it cycled back to the main menu without actually putting me on with a human. A different time, I got a human, they started to speak, just as they said my badge number is, and then the call dropped right then. They are intentionally, that can't be anything other than that the person cut the call before I got their badge number and complained they had done this to me, with knowing who had done it. Um, this is almost certainly them trying not to make themselves available for people to speak them. Can't speak them. You can't deal with more complex issues like this, or issues where you got screwed where they don't have the phone tree immediately referenced. Most of the things that immediately reference the phone tree, you'll notice, are not things to deal with getting screwed by an employer. Um, this is the abuse of power and inequalities of power that are inherent to capitalism. Um, The Department of Labor has resisted some of these efforts to be subverted the way the IRS has, and still has some good resources. But I'm sure you've heard in the news about the way the Department of Labor is under attack by the Trump administration. So it's only a matter of time until they're just as bad as the IRS, which has been under attack by the Republican Party for 30 years now. So this way before Trump. Uh, and I would note there's a presentation on it. Here's another page. On January 10th, 2024, the Department of Labor published a final rule revising the department's guidance on how to analyze who is an employer and independent contractor. This final rule rescinds the independent contractor status under Fair Labor Standards Act Rule 2021 IC rule that was published on January 7, 2021, replaces analysis for determining employer independent contractor status is more consistent with the Fair Labor Standards Act as interpreted by longstanding judicial precedent. This has to do with, in Trump's first term, he tried to subvert what Fair Labor Standards Act and enforcement of this rule. So this has been under attack for a while. And the Fair Labor Standards Act, by the way, was passed under the presidency of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. This is an old rule, an old law passed during the Great Depression. It's been in place for a long time, and the American right has been trying to subvert it ever since. The Labor Standards Act, the Fair Labor Standards Act. There was a what was it? There were several acts like this, not Labor Standards, Fair Labor Standards Act, and I'm trying to remember the other one. But there were a couple laws like this passed in the Great Depression. When Truman came into power, there was already a rule that started to subvert with the NLRB and how that was structured. The power of organized labor. There was also Taft-Hartley Act, which I don't think that was the same as the other rule, but maybe Taft-Hartley is another name for it, which removed the right to secondary strikes, general strikes, put some restrictions on unions, created, I believe that was that created the unconstitutional restriction on communists being charged of labor unions, which the Supreme Court later ruled unconstitutional, but not before. There was a purge of leftists from positions of leadership in unions, and some unions were shut down because they refused to comply with this. So that already weakened organized labor, and specifically the most radical segment of organized labor that was making the most trouble for those in power. And could have done the most to keep labor strong into the 21st century. This is part of a program of undermining the worker, of accumulating power to the capitalist class. It started as soon as FDR was dead. It was cold in his grave, and it's been continuing ever since. Or it started before he was even cold in his grave, as I believe the saying starts as soon as it was before they're even cold in their grave, like as soon as they died. It's been continuing ever since. And I think I mentioned this before, the way the U.S. has been imploding itself and screwing over ordinary people. If the Cold War had lasted a little longer, the U.S. was limited how much it was screwing ordinary people during the Cold War because they had the Soviet Union as a competitor, but it was still doing these things. It's likely if the Cold War had lasted, 30 more years, maybe the U.S. wouldn't be quite as bad as it is today. But it would still be getting worse and worse. And I would bet you the Soviet Union would have won the Cold War if it kept going, because the U.S. is losing its moral superiority with how it's undermining workers, how it's has the right wing undermining previous laws, and the constant abuses of power that are going on. In my case, the government trying to make it so I can't survive because they're saying I'm not eligible for Social Security disability insurance because an employer's took advantage of this provision basically, and because of an exemption that was added for universities I think it was 1990 something. It looks like the Safe Harbor Act, to having to pay into Social Security, which was ostensibly, I think, to protect students who were not who were illegal immigrants and managed to get into universities, but in reality gave universities a way to exploit student workers even worse. Um, and things go like this, where a pleasant sounding name and a supposedly about helping people, but there are laws that are actually about hurting people. It's been like that since since the beginnings of the Fair Labor Standards Act being undermined in Truman's presidency, where one of the first acts to do that had some noble sounding name, but actually undermined the Fair Labor Standards Act. It was like called the Labor Management Relations Act or something. Um, and so, yeah, I'm going to screw with that. Even if I get my YouTube channel to where I earned money and was able to get Social Security work credits, they probably say I can't use work credits I earned after my disability date to go back and count towards my earlier. And I don't know if they would argue I can't even try using disability date that's after I became disabled to include more recent work credits, because YouTube is one of the very few things I might be able to make like one work credit a year if this channel gets to making like a couple hundred a month or something. Um, they probably play games with that to make sure that no matter what I do, and there's no way I'd ever get this channel in reasonable time. If they start saying I have to do a new disability date, even though I'm already been disabled since 2021, that's later, then I'd have to like have this channel earning like $6,000 or $7,000 a year for like 6 years to qualify as SSDI, which is impossible and ridiculous. And my financial situation gets worse and worse that whole time. Like they are trying to endanger the survival of me and people like me. People who are vulnerable, and probably you. And if you're paying attention, it's not just going to be the immigrants who are there illegally deporting to a bunch of immigrants, who Venezuelan immigrants who were legally in the country. These were not undocumented immigrants who, a violation of the Alien Foreign Enemy Nationals Act or something, a rule from 1800. Trump pulled up and illegally deported a bunch of legal Venezuelan immigrants and sent them to El Salvador and put them in a prison. They had committed no crime, but they were put in prison. They were legal immigrants and they were still deported without due process. Like, it's not just going to be those people. It's going to be you. It's going to be your family. It's going to be your friends. It's going to be the old woman down the street who's on retirement. It's going to be someone who's disabled in your community. It's going to be an LGBTQ person. It's going to be, your neighborhood socialist. Maybe a guy you didn't even know was socialist who they'll probably start locking socialists up for our political views. I says I'm a socialist myself. Uh, they will come for more and more people. It'll get worse and worse. Women's rights, all sorts of things. Do not think, and they'll come as if you're most likely a worker, viewer, they'll come for your rights as a worker. Bit by bit, you are going to get screwed over. Do not sit and sleep. Wake up, resist, make some noise, get out, protest, demand that your congressman or senator um, start a new political party, a third party, because honestly, the Democrats are. I don't want to say a swear word that'll get my channel uh, delisted. So let me just say they are evil pricks, and they are just less evil than the Republicans. Don't do lesser two evil things unless you're in a swing state. It's not even going to matter in a lot of elections. Um, hold them accountable. If it's a close local or state election, or you're in a swing state, yeah, you may need to vote for the Democrats. But if you're in a solid blue state or solid red, start a third party because it's not going to change the outcome of the elections in those areas. Um, let's try and fix things before it gets to the point where electorals won't work anymore. If things keep getting worse, someday there will be a day where like the people who are advocating for a violent revolution will actually be right, and you don't want to get to that point. I don't want to get to that point. I'm not advocating for that stuff. I'm telling you, if you ignore the the window for peaceful change while it's still possible, someday we'll all wake up, and that will be the only way out, and that will be horrendous. We do not want to end up there. I wish you all the best. Take care of each other. Be kind yourselves, and may always find a guiding star to lead you home. Adieu.